So there's been a series that I've wanted to do for some time, and since we're at the end of days for TikTok, I thought I would go ahead and do it. My name's Morgan Richardson. I'm a divorce attorney in Manhattan, and I've been following this stuff about, oh my God, they want to get rid of no fault. So let's talk about it because I was old enough to be a lawyer before New York adopted no fault, which it didn't adopt until 2010. Okay, so let's get into it. When divorce first became a thing, when divorce started trending, you could only get a divorce based on one thing, and that was adultery. And let me ask you which direction you think that actually took place in. Like, who was getting the divorce? Who was the one claiming adultery? Yeah, because after all, during that time, marital SA was still legal. By the late 19th century, the United States, all of the states had divorce in each state. But rest assured, they had one thing in common. They all needed to have fault-based grounds. We are a nosy bunch. We want to make sure you're not just throwing away a good marriage, not just throwing away a good man. We want to make sure that you have sufficient grounds, at least at that time. So divorce was conceived as this idea of a remedy for the innocent against the guilty. There has to be some sort of fault, some reason, a valid reason that we're letting you out of this marriage, and that would therefore preserve the sanctity of the marriage as a concept. Fault grounds, when they initially came into being, as we talked about, adultery was the number one reason. Extreme cruelty. Desertion. Many states would also allow you to do insanity, conviction of a crime, habitual drunkenness, and drug addiction. That brings us to the early 1900s. There was then divorce in all of the states. They just had to be on the basis of a showing of grounds. And as those grounds started to evolve, we'll see that you started to concoct legal fictions, if you will, which would enable people to get divorced under the grounds, but without necessarily having to jump through some of the hoops that we had in place. So for example, here in New York, before we enacted no fault, we had a ground called constructive abandonment. Not just abandonment, it was constructive abandonment, which amounted to sexual abandonment. So my very first divorce case was a woman in her 80s, and I had to have her testify to the fact that she had demanded sexual intercourse from her husband and that he had refused sexual intercourse, and that not only had he refused, there was no physical impediment to them having intercourse, and that had gone on for a period of a year or more in order to meet those grounds. Ultimately, by switching into a no-fault scheme, the states started saying, we don't care why these people are getting divorced. You want to put someone on the stand in their 80s to testify about their sex life? Ew. No, we don't care. We don't care why. We just want to be here to help you divide the stuff that matters, like property and custody. And New York finally did that in 2010. It was a huge fight, and not everyone that you would think of was on one side or the other side of that fight with respect to what they thought our no-fault scheme should be. And we'll talk about that in a different TikTok. Here's an also interesting point. I would actually make more money under a fault-based scheme because you could have an entire trial as to the validity of grounds. You have a trial before we even get to the trial about custody and your stuff. We have a trial about whether or not you can qualify for the divorce. And you could be told no after the end of that trial. No, sorry, you did not meet your grounds. You cannot get divorced. Try again later. So also, no fault and fault grounds have nothing to do with the terms contested and uncontested. Contested just means there's a fight. Uncontested means there's not really a fight. We're just filing the paperwork to get the divorce done. It has nothing to do with the reasons why we're having a divorce in the first place. The reasons why, that is grounds.